Ladies and gentlemen, regrets, I have a few. I think probably some of you can carry on with the line, but then again, too few to mention. Hopefully these guys are going to mention a few regrets, or otherwise it could be quite a long 3/4 of an hour. But we'll see. I hope so. Welcome and thank you for coming. You've spurned banking, recruitment and technology. But we're going to cover all of those. So you're actually in the right session, because I'm sure we've got some regrets and pitfalls around those. I think these gentlemen are very experienced. They've actually done it, and they've got real life stories that they're going to tell you. So the last thing you want to hear a lot is from me, but I'll set the scene a little bit. I'm a moderator. I'm going to cajole them. I'm going to interrupt them. I'm going to try but I also want your input, please, and I'm not going to use the app system. You can look at your phones, but only to check your emails. You're not going to, if you hold up your hand, I'll ask at several points, and got things that you want to interject, please do. Let's try and do it like that. If you don't want to, it doesn't matter at all. I'm wearing glasses that I can actually only see about 4 feet. So I actually don't know when you're raising your hand, but I'm sure it'll become obvious. I thought Greg Dyke was fantastic yesterday. He set up this session beautifully, talking about well, first of all, non-exec directors. He said that no one listens to them. And you can add, I'm really a sort of non-exec and a consultant. So certainly no one listens to us. But what he also said about Mossborough Hall was it encapsulated a lot of the things that can go wrong. As far as I recall, he invested some cash to stave off foreclosure, and then things went wrong. The building works, the liquor license, there were fights in the car park, or maybe that was another story of a dinner. I can't actually remember. English Heritage got involved. The floor levels in the bar didn't join up. He was great. So is he here? Because we'd like him on the stage. But he's not here. So we couldn't afford him. So what we have got are these guys. And we've got Peter Banks on the left over there. Peter runs Rudding Park Hotel, which involves a hotel, a spa, and a golf course. So quite a lot to go wrong, potentially. Kevin Charity runs Coaching Inns Group, 13 hotels around the country, and a lot that could potentially go wrong. Andy Janssens runs Janssens Property, slightly different angle. He, if you like, creates things and then gets away. So, but he has got to get away. And Robert Nadler creates things and stays in. So he I'm afraid, can't run away. I want to just come back to Kevin's group, because Kevin's group, Coaching In Group, used to be called the Bulldog Hotel Group, which reminds me of a story about a friend of mine. I don't know if any of you remember the Dangerous Dogs Act, but there was a Dangerous Dogs Act, and a friend of mine was a barrister, and he was defending someone with a dangerous dog. And there's not a lot you can do, really. The evidence was quite clear it was a dangerous dog. But he settled on the dog's name as being the only ray of hope. And the dog was called Stan. And he thought, well, it's a family name, I'll go on that. And he extolled, you wouldn't call a dangerous dog Stan. And then he was tapped on the shoulder and given a little piece of paper. And he said, I'm afraid I have to inform the court. The dog's name was Satan. One letter, but a very important letter. So be very careful in whatever you do. Spell things correctly. Don't use the wrong letters. So we're going to cover things like location, development, regulations and the law, finance and ownership structure. We'll ramble on. There's lots of things to cover. Do, as I say, ask some questions if you'd like to. We're going to start with location. I've got one story about a hotelier who I think got location wrong. Whether it was his fault or not, I don't know. He chose to build a Holiday Inn near a motorway junction. They never opened the motorway junction. It makes trading quite difficult. So you've got to be careful with location. And I think, Kevin, you've got a story about location, but talk about your group and where you're located and why, because it'll give people a flavour of coaching in group, please.
We're very strong on picking the choice of location, and we operate in market towns, so ultimately not cities, so they're small population sources. But rather than look for a particular town, we look for the location within the town. So it has to be marketplace, it has to be on the high street, it has to be almost the focal point property in that town, in that market town.
And
so
when you didn't do it?
Well, I fell in love with one. Walked along, viewed it, the heart took over, and it's probably the most costly mistake I made really to date. We purchased this building just because I thought it was gorgeous. Didn't put any of the business sensibilities to it. Totally over my heart, overruled my head, and we purchased this place. We finally managed to offload it 4 years later, and fundamentally we gave it away because it was dragging us down so badly, costing a fortune, losing a fortune, and it's a very hard lesson to learn really, and a very expensive one, but it has really concentrated us now, helped us not make those mistakes again.
And Andy, I think it's absolutely critical. So
the temptation at the moment is we have quite a peaky market, so quite a few secondary locations are now working, and the temptation is in a peaky market to look at these secondary locations. And I think if you get your timing right in the cycle, you can develop an exit. So regret for me, going back to 2007 and 2008, was actually not buying a prime location, buying in Bradford on the basis that it looked like a good asset with a good bit of income. However, with a downturn in 2007, 2008, those assets just fall off the edge of the cliff, actually.
Yeah,
so if you're sticking to prime, stick to prime always if you can.
And agents will all tell you that they can always sell prime in difficult markets, and it isn't that hard to remember them. It's much more difficult as you go down the spectrum. But we're also faced with Aberdeen, which was a very strong market. And there are people still developing in Aberdeen. And it was based around principally one commodity. And we heard that the oil price is going to stay low. I wonder if any of you want to talk about the future of Aberdeen, because I don't think it's the end of the world for Aberdeen by any means. I think there's a great deal of knowledge and wealth remaining in Aberdeen, but I don't think any of you are, but would you now? Would you operate, would you develop, and if not, why not?
I think for me, as a developer, that's a great example of fixing your exits. I think you've got a market there in Aberdeen which depends on oil. So if you're a hotelier in that market, and maybe there are some sitting here depending on that whole sector doing well, as soon as that sector goes, your turnover falls off a cliff, and the value of your assets are falling. So for us, if we were in Aberdeen, we'd be there fixing a lease to an operator, we'd be there working with a turnkey, so we still have our exit. And for me, that's a great example why we don't get involved in operating agreements. We do not operate hotels, but we're happy finding, sourcing, building, and selling to occupiers.
I think it's important that if you're a hotelier, which unfortunately I'm cursed with being, that you don't just run a one-trick pony. Aberdeen has a danger of being a one-trick pony. At Rodding Park, we've got 5 or 6 principal revenue streams. So if one of the legs of the stool falls off, the other 4 legs are always there. So whatever your location is, make sure you've got 3 or 4 decent chunky revenue streams so that you've got protection in case anything goes wrong.
Okay, so we picked the location, and let's move back, and we're going to develop a hotel, because I want to talk a bit about development, because I think it's susceptible to many of the pitfalls that people come across. Because A, you don't know how the hotel is going to trade, and B, you've got the risk of developing it. So, Robert, do you want to kick us off and talk about, because you've developed hotels?
I've been in a fortunate position in terms of development that my background, amongst the many different careers I've had, I'm a chartered surveyor, although I've given up my letters because it's a useless organisation. I didn't say that. Am I being recorded? Sorry. Are you a chartered surveyor too?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, there we are. Good. The two of us.
We're still paying our dues, though.
Anybody else in here, chartered surveyors? No.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
few
there
of
are
us.
loads of them.
Okay. So I've run a development company previously, a publicly quoted business, and carried out quite a lot of development around the country across numerous different sectors. And more recently, developed hotels for myself. And you come at it when you're developing for yourself with a very different attitude. And Andy and I are diametrically opposed ends of the development spectrum. Andy's going to develop something and then sell it. So he has a different criteria to me because I'm developing something and I'm going to hold on to it. I used to be in Andy's camp, and I'm now looking at what I'm developing in a completely different way. The most important thing for me is the operational ease of what I've created, the longevity, the whole life costing. It's no longer about what looks best, but maybe doesn't work quite so well, maybe doesn't last quite so long. I have a totally different perspective about what I do. What that really does also mean is you have to do a hell of a lot more work before you start on site. And that's one of the dangerous elements as a developer previously, particularly in London. In London, when you look at where your costs go, most of your cost goes into your site. Your build cost is relatively small in relation to your site cost. And you buy your site, you're sitting on a site with borrowed money, you have interest accumulating fairly rapidly. In the days when if you could borrow below 10%, you were lucky, and it was more likely to be 15%. So that's rolling up very rapidly. So your priority is get onto that site, build as quickly as you can. What I've learned to my cost in doing that on a number of occasions is that's a mistake. Stop, breathe, take your time, investigate, look at everything you possibly can, which is what we now do on the hotel side. You really need to understand what you're developing, understand the locational issues, understand the physical issues, particularly if you're renovating a building. Strip it back to the core. Do measured survey after measured survey, because things change. Every time you strip something off, it turns out to be different to what you thought it was. Take your time. Get in there too quickly because you think you're saving a bit on interest. The costs at the end can be absolutely gargantuan. So that, in development terms, that's probably the biggest mistake I've made, is developing too quickly, not investigating sufficiently, thinking that the interest cost of sitting on a site was more important than the build cost.
Peter, you
We've
develop.
we've done 5 developments at Reading Park, and I agree partially with what Robert says. I probably agree with him more than I'll agree with Andy. I think the fundamental, first of all, is to understand what your guests want. It's no good building something from a developer's perspective just because it looks good or sexy or it's fantastic, all the rest of it. I am really not a fan of build it and they'll come. I'm a fan of understand what they want fundamentally and then build it, and then you'll make money. Because if you're left sitting holding the baby that isn't working for you, you're going to still be worrying to pay your interest. So really get into the guts of what your guests want and design your product around your guests.
And how do you build it? I'm afraid this isn't beyond my expertise, but how do you actually...
Every single development we have done has been by traditional contract. So that's where you make all of your mistakes on paper, and it probably takes us 2 years to design our latest spa, which is a £9 million build. It took us 2 years to actually design it entirely on paper, the whole thing. And then the builder is at risk. Do not, and this is speaking as an operator, do not go anywhere near design and build.
Andy?
I'm totally the other way around. Design and build, fixed price, end of story. I don't have to think about it.
Design and build from an operator.
You guys are a nightmare for me. I've got to be honest.
Absolutely. Guilty as charged.
I will not be building for you.
Good.
Andy and I are on the same page here.
Design and build requires you to give the contractor the opportunity to make hundreds upon hundreds of compromises. So, for example... For example, we wanted skirting boards with a certain shadow gap, right? The skirting boards were going to go flush with the wall because that was the look we wanted, with a shadow gap. A nightmare of a plastering detail. Nightmare. The builder had an absolute baby about it because he hadn't costed correctly the amount of work in this plastering. It looks absolutely fantastic, so much better than just a bit of skirting you could slap on. There's hundreds of those compromises that he would have made to save money. He would have saved money, and we didn't take it. We got the building we wanted, and he took the loss.
I have to say,
That's the whole point.
I'm with Andy.
Yeah.
It really does depend on the form of contract, because design and build isn't a one-trick pony. There isn't just one form of design and build. Having been a developer for 30, 40, nearly 40 years in one form or another, including this last 10 years as a hotelier, we used to go through the traditional procurement route, try to get the best contract, maybe not always the cheapest one. Now I'm absolutely wedded to partnership, working with a builder who you know, who comes into the building as you're stripping it out, who helps you and the architect design the building, because ultimately architects, engineers, M&E consultants don't know what the fuck they're doing. The guy who knows is the builder. He actually has to put it together. They will put it down on paper. An M&E consultant will tell you what it should, how it should look like, even though he's meant to tell you how it's going to work. It's the M&E contractor who actually puts it all together. And often the two don't really join up. If you've got your contractor on site from day one, you're working with him, it works quicker, it works better, because all the construction issues are dealt with from day one. And to address your issue on design, what you do is when you novate over, the professionals, novating over for those that aren't familiar with the term, is normally your architect is working for you, you have a direct relationship. When you do design and build, the direct relationship is with the builder, and the architect and the other professionals work for the builder. But what we do is we have a form of contract where the architect still owes you a duty of care and is not allowed to make any design changes without consulting you. So therefore, you are protected, you know what's happening, and you have a voice in that. They cannot scale down the quality. So you can protect yourself. It's about having the right form of contract. And for us, partnership has worked. I'm pleased to say we're on our fourth, fifth construction contract with the same builder, and it has been a really collegial experience. It's worked very well.
What do you want to add, Andy?
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think having the right professionals is important as well. So if you're building 4 or 5 hotels, you gradually assemble a team that you trust, that have experience in the hotel sector, and you can move from project to project knowing you've got a safe pair of hands going forward as well. And then if you're lucky, you get the right contractor involved, and they're all used to working together, and you can't let them get on with it, but you know they're professional and they have produced the product already.
I agree, and please can we edit out my last little bit about professionals?
Has anyone from the floor? Yes, there's a question there. Speak up, because I'm afraid you're not mic'd.
I agree with everything you've just said, you two guys. It also links through to funding, does it not? Because if you have a funder, I'm sure people can hear me, but if you have a funder who's waiting to see what you need to borrow, if you've got the right contractor and a fixed price lump sum, that will crystallise the deal for you.
Yeah. From a banking point of view, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, but if
so.
all of our developments have been borrowed money, and you've got a fixed contract, fixed price with the builder, and they were perfectly happy with that as well. Yeah. Ultimately, it gives you, it might be that I'm a control freak, and being a hotelier, that may well be the case. It gives you ultimate control. If you want ultimate control of every single tiny detail, I've found my way works.
Paul?
Right, but I think, sorry, on the detail, surely you just need to detail that up front. What is your detail? Set it out to the contractor.
It depends how detailed you're going. We literally had drawings of the skirting boards, and down to every single thing. And we knew every single detail. I was all over that building, or all over all 5 buildings, every single day. I'm a nightmare to work for.
Did you go for
Paul?
No, bang on time. Thank you very much. And on budget, Chef. Thank you.
My name's Paul Shield. I work for John Renner Partners. I'm a chartered surveyor. I'm afraid I still pay the fees. So from a construction project management perspective, I'd like to cut the middle ground here, and I'd say you're both right, but what the key is risk, and it's how much and who pays for that risk. So with design and build, the contractor is taking the risk, and you'll pay a premium for him taking that risk.
Yep.
With traditional, you'll invest the time up front, you'll get the product exactly what you want, the skirting detail that you want. Again, you'll pay that up front with consultants' fees and design fees, perhaps.
Yep.
But you may get a bit more of a price because the contractor has less risk. So, both right.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on. There are different ways of doing it. This is a theme that's going to come up. There are different ways of doing lots of this. There isn't a right and wrong. It depends on lots of circumstances, the people around the table. There is always a solution, and there always are some issues that will arise, whether that's on a building contract or an operational contract or wherever. I want to move on to regulation and the law, because I met someone the other day and I asked him for a story of something that he'd done where he hadn't anticipated a change in the law. And it was quite a funny story. I thought he used to run a chain of late-night bars and clubs in London, a big chain, and he operated them all. He was responsible for the whole budget and of the operational side, and he knew that the smoking ban was coming in, but he didn't check when, and a week before the smoking ban came in, he ordered 1 million packets of matches for his chain, and they arrived a week before the smoking ban came in, and he was probably left thinking, that was an error that I could have picked up, but I didn't. I want to pick up some things on planning where I'm sure the panel have got planning and other regulation where things have not gone as they'd expected them to go. So I don't mind who we start with. Maybe Kevin, you.
With planning, I mean, interestingly, in years gone by, we've tried, like some people, other people, to jump the regulation to see if we could do it faster, to actually not go down the planning route correctly, and ultimately it's an absolute disaster. Learned well from the past experiences. What I do actually like is regulation, especially planning regulation, because it's clearly written out. It's clearly there to follow, and that's what I love about this country, is that actually it may be long-winded sometimes and may take time, but if actually you stick to the regulation, you follow the process, you actually normally, on the whole, get what you actually wanted in the first place. Sometimes there's some negotiation with heritage or with conservation, but ultimately there is a regulation. Now I've got a good friend who's an operator in Asia, and for him to get what he needs to build, it all depends who he can bribe, and we don't have that here fundamentally. So it's just so much easier. That's what I like about regulation. Really, stick with it. That's the lesson.
I think that's a ringing endorsement. Peter, have you brown envelopes, and maybe how have you got around it?
Why does he ask the hotelier that? Honestly, not brown envelope, but I do believe that being part of your place is necessary. So I ensure that I am on various committees or whatever it is. I've been in Harrogate 20 years now, and I ensure that I'm on various committees. I'm vice chairman of some tourism thingamabob. That, helpfully enough, the chief executive of the council is on. And we're on Pedro terms. And not that it helps in any way, but I know that if I pick the phone up to talk to him, I will get a response. He will pick the phone up to me. So no brown envelopes, but it's who you
invest the time
Absolutely.
with the people.
Invest the time with the people.
I think you had a similar story in Soho, didn't you?
On our Soho development, so the hotel we now have, we bought the site many years before, and we thought we were engaging with the planners. We believed that they wanted a resolutely modern building, so we got a resolutely modern architect to design something in glass, and we spent 18 months talking to the design officer, who kept pushing us in a direction, and we weren't really listening. And the direction was, no, keep it classical. The building that we had on site was a 1950s monstrosity. The one that had been there before, which had been bombed in the war, was 1686, William and Mary, wonderful little jewel, which had been the model for Dr. Manette's house in Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. And there's a Manette Street just down the road, not very far away. And they were trying to tell us, don't go down this route. We weren't told categorically, no, forget about modern, do something classical. It was a little more subtle than that, but we weren't really listening. We were convinced we knew best. And what we were going to do was do something extraordinary, completely out of keeping with the buildings around, but it was going to be a stunner. And 18 months later, we were refused at committee. We then said, okay, resolutely classical rather than resolutely modern. We got Robert Adam to design a building for us, beautiful classical building. And it went to committee. It took 15 minutes. They then spent the next 40 minutes arguing over a £40,000 public realm contribution. And should it go on this or that? And the building won the Giles Worsley Award from the Georgian Group for the best modern building in the Georgian context in 2014. So it's a lovely building. But we went down the completely wrong route by not listening. We thought we were engaging, but engaging actually means listening and not just telling.
We had a totally opposite experience. So we have a site in Chester at the moment where we engage with the local authority, design officer, planners, listened to them in terms of their design bulk massing and complied entirely with what they wanted at that stage. To the extent we went to a design review committee as well with independent consultants who rubber stamped what we did. Went to committee didn't like it. So there's that disconnect between the actual officers
completely,
and
the officers and the committee.
Yeah.
So it's all about getting to know the individual committee members, understanding what they're canvassing their opinion, understanding what they want to see, and actually they will overrule the officers. One of the officers for us actually said, over my dead body, are you getting another extension?
Yes.
And actually it was over a dead body.
It wasn't
It wasn't a brown envelope. It was a little lead, piece of lead.
But that's the point, though. It's politics, isn't it?
It is politics.
And
Absolutely.
you can't always get through to committee members. It's quite hard to do.
Yeah. It's easier in a small environment like Harrogate.
Yeah.
And I'm not actually sure. I think because we've been very fortunate following that experience. We've now in our Victoria and our Covent Garden hotels, we have started getting much more engaged and talking exactly as you suggest to local councillors, getting to know them. Some are more amenable than others. There's some that simply will not respond to anything. Phone call, email, nothing.
Very true.
Do not want to engage. Others are very keen. And I think there's a big difference between going in as a developer and going in as an operator. In my experience, and perhaps with Soho, I took my property development experience, they look at property developers as people who are in there, in and out to make money. They're not contributing to the neighborhood unless they're forced to do something that's wonderful and contribute to the public realm. As an operator, you're going to be there long term, you're going to employ people, you're going to have an impact on the community. And ultimately, that's what's important to them, because you have to remember that they're there to represent the people who vote for them, who are the people who live there, not the people who work there, not the businesses. Yeah. Their primary concern are the residents.
I think that's a really good point. Andy, do you take your operator along, or at that stage you don't know who your operator's going to be, so you can't take him along? Or
No, we always have an operator with us. So taking that very same point, I feel planners and committees do like to understand what's going to happen in the building. And I agree with you. I think that's quite important because they can share the experience of the hotel, how it's going to contribute to the vicinity as well.
Yeah.
I'm actually working with a client at the moment who wants to develop a huge hotel, and they aren't from the UK and they cannot understand why the default answer from the local authorities, wherever they look to place this, is no. And they're bringing a huge investment and a huge amount of employment, and they are an operator, but wherever they go, the default answer is no, we don't want it. So has anyone got any other facets they want to cover on that, on planning and getting the right response and the way to do it? I think that we seem to have come to an agreed. Has anyone got anything on that? Or if not, we'll move on to something else. We'll move on to financing and structure, and we were told yesterday that I think Greg Dyke wouldn't explain why he had this secret a way of outbidding other sites. But I think that some people have been talking about it. But there are different ways of doing things. Some people are using ground rents as a way of unlocking things. Some people use leases like Andy. Some people use management agreements and franchises. Robert, you structured something in America for a specific reason, as far as I recall, Delaware, and it didn't quite, the reason wasn't, in the end, the reason wasn't the reason you should have been doing it.
In my property development days, one of my early forays into development was to try to do something in America, where I had a lot of contacts at the time. And so I decided to structure the investment through a whole series of companies using Delaware, where you pay, where you can shelter your tax. It's interesting that the American government is very exercised about tax transparency. We all, when we're doing any sort of financing deal, have to go through all sorts of paperwork, specifically because of the US, even if you don't have US investors or shareholders. If you do, it's even worse. And yet Delaware is the biggest laggard in this whole issue. Somebody needs to address this. But anyway, at the time we thought we'd use Delaware and shelter our tax. And we set up all these corporate entities, expensive advisors, lots of trips over there. It cost an absolute fortune to set this up for a relatively small investment. And in the end, to my embarrassment, I have to admit the whole thing was an absolute dud. We lost lots of money. And instead of being able to shelter tax, which is what we would hope would happen when we made a profit, we ended up not being able to shelter losses. So we had losses that we couldn't use because we'd been so bloody clever. And I felt like a complete idiot. I hadn't thought the thing through. You think, okay, it's great if we make money, but there's always the possibility you might not. So sometimes try not to be too clever. It's also changed my views. I changed my views generally about tax. Whilst I might not be Jeremy Corbyn's greatest fan, I do believe that we all need to pay our share of tax. A country can't survive if the richest people in the country pay the least tax in proportionate terms. You know, a country like Greece, when it went into default, I think one Greek millionaire was paying tax, the rest didn't. You can't survive, you know, in that sort of environment. So I think you've got to, when you're setting up a business, look at the whole thing. Don't just be an optimist. You have to sometimes pour a little bit of cold water and say, okay, what happens if?
Yeah, I think it brings me back to ground rents. I think that, and I'd be very interested, I haven't rehearsed this at all with it, and I don't know what people on the panel think. My own view is that, that ground rents work in a strong market, but you're paying away your first 15p of every pound that you own to someone else for a long time, and in a downturn, you may find you've only got 20p, if that, of your pound of profit because there is a downturn. So you're putting your business at long-term risk. But I wonder, has anyone...
And you lose control. You don't own your freehold, do you, at the end of the day? So ground rent, a ground lease implies terms and conditions. If you own your own freehold, you're a master of your own destiny, aren't you? With a ground lease, you're beholden to a freeholder who has various other leasehold aspects that might control how you run your business, or consents to assign to somebody else, or sublets, or licenses as well. So it's not certainly something I wouldn't entertain.
Does anyone in the room want to put the other side? Because I don't want to just present it. It's a two-sided coin. So has anyone else? There are a couple. Joni, I can see you. My glasses go that far. Hey, do you want a mic? I don't know if there is a mic. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, obviously you've got to take into account the risks of that in terms of, and it is about getting the structure right, but it is just a different way of financing. If you take a loan out, you're still having to pay interest on that, so it's just a different means of financing, surely.
Sorry, there's a gentleman behind you.
Gerard Nolan.
Gerard, I think he might.
So I've done lots of ground rent deals, and add to that, it's a method of financing. So you say you want to own your freehold. Who owns your freehold?
So if you're doing a ground lease, you are selling your freehold to a fund, I assume.
Okay, so what happens when you sell to Travelodge?
Sorry?
What happens when you do a lease with Travelodge? Who owns the freehold?
A fund.
Yeah. And so what happens when you go to see your bank manager? Who controls the freehold?
Don't deal with banks.
Yeah. Banks control it, don't they? They're taking senior debt. By the time you've signed all your covenants, they really control your freehold to a certain extent. So to counter James's point, there's a downturn in the market. The asset value drops by 40%. You've leveraged at 65%. Who's in control? The bank. It's not you. You might own the freehold on a piece of paper, but all your covenants say breach of your LTV, haven't got sufficient interest cover. So it is. I would say counter to that in when you couldn't borrow any money from a bank in the 2007 to 2000 or late 2007 to 2010, you could do a ground rent deal, and that funded the site. And then you get what you pay for. Devil in the detail, what do you sign up to on that ground rent? So if you have a very benign ground rent,
I agree.
you're allowed to develop, you're allowed to extend, you're allowed to do what you want. If you've got a landlord that goes, thou shalt not move the wall, then you maybe have a problem over 200-year ground rent deal.
Personally, I'd still rather own the freehold and not ask anybody what I want to do. I'd rather get on with
Absolutely,
it, so.
but when you haven't got the money and you need to raise it...
Yes.
From an operator's perspective, I probably think, and we've got, covenants as long as your arm, but at least I can do what I want on my building, so if I want to put a hairdresser, not that I trouble the hairdresser very often, if I want to put a hairdresser in the spa and she's going to sign a licence, I don't need to go run into somebody else to get it done. I just, thank you very much, get the job done.
Yeah.
So it does allow you operational freedom, but I fully take your point. If you're paying rent or you're paying the bank,
Well, I also think that if you need to use that in order to get to raise the money for your development of your project, fine. It's a way of doing it, but like my colleagues, it's something I wouldn't favour. In the property market, the chartered surveyors here will understand the concept of marriage value. When you have a freehold and a long leasehold, or a lease, you combine the two, generally it's worth more than the sum of the parts, and that's called marriage value. And you argue and negotiate when you're doing that sort of deal. When the freehold is buying a long lease or the long leasehold is buying the freehold, you're arguing over the marriage value, and that's what the Freehold Enfranchisement Act is all about, that portion called marriage value, i.e. when you split the interests, there's leakage. There's some value that disappears into the ether, which you recreate when you merge them. And you just have to be conscious of that. It is not a one-way street. And the value is more about that element of control that each party has or doesn't have. So use it by all means, but be aware that there's some value leakage somewhere in the equation.
Okay, I've got an amber light, which means we haven't got long, but I think that perhaps an area that going much more in operation, because we've been talking quite technically, and I'd like to just deal with some operational issues. I think that technology, there's a lot of technology in our businesses today. Have any of the panel, you embracers? Are you, Kevin, what's your thoughts?
I mean, we embrace technology, but I'll be honest, we're just a little bit cautious all the time. We don't want to be the forerunners. We'd rather just pick up and watch the other mistakes being made, really. We launched our own app 4 years ago, which turned to be an absolute waste of time. I think it's time we may revisit that shortly, but it was just too soon 4 years ago. But with all technology, especially it can be sizable investments. A mistake I made in the late 90s was buying an EPOS system, which I thought was absolutely fantastic and delivered everything I possibly wanted it to deliver. But at the end of the day, no matter how good that technology was, what I didn't really investigate was how good the company was that supplied it. And their backup, their technical services, their development department just didn't exist. And so as this product started to fade and fail, the company just couldn't cope with bringing it forward. And that's the point with technology. It's constantly got to be reinvested and redeveloped. So ultimately, within 2 years, I abandoned it, and it cost about, I think, £70,000 in the end just to throw in the dustbins. So hard lesson learned. So with technology, the fact that it changes so much, I'd rather hire technology, rent technology, than buy it.
I rather echo that, and we heard yesterday from Chris Tarrant that the OTAs are investing continually in the customer journey. And it always slightly surprises me that the brands don't work more with them because they are so good. at satisfying what customers want. And I had a conversation with one of the, and this is maybe slightly off the subject, but I had a conversation with one of the major international brands, and I asked them, with 20,000 rooms per night being lost to Airbnb from hotel rooms, according to Chris Tarrant, do you put any of your inventory on Airbnb? And I think he looked at me as though I came from a slightly different planet, which I often get. But do you guys put your inventory on Airbnb? Because it seems to me all it is a route to you who might want to stay in a place for a night for a reason. And if you go on booking.com now, half the inventory is people's houses, flats, villas, whatever. Do you yet use the guys who are, if you like, marketing to the world to sell your inventory? And any of you, please, it's the last question.
You can't.
You can't.
If you are a small boutique hotel with unique attributes, yes, you can ask them to put your product on there, and there are a lot of small, quirky hotels offering something special that are on Airbnb. Our kind of hotels could probably not go on there if you wanted to. It's not a bad idea. They're an extraordinary platform. In technological terms, it's a great platform, and they offer an extraordinary service. And it's one of the questions that I asked them some years ago when then the chief operating officer, can't remember his name, was in Berlin, and we had a long conversation about it. And I said, why don't you become an OTA? You could turn yourself from the hotelier's nemesis to the best friend. And he said, it's not in our plan ever to do that. It might be, because what they say with one hand, they then do with the other. But we couldn't. If we wanted to, most hotel groups could not do that yet.
Okay.
It may change.
My answer is not yet.
Yeah.
The appetite isn't there from Airbnb, and fortunately at the moment I'm operating at about 84% occupancy, but year round. But the world can change, and it may well be that they actually develop their platform to do it. And so, I might just sell my suites just to them because they might have a boutique Airbnb coming up, and then we can all make a bit of money. So not yet, I think, is the answer.
Kevin?
I don't think we will for a while. I mean, we're in a fortunate position. Our bedroom stock isn't that huge anyway, per average per site, so we can fill it reasonably easy. But I do wonder what effect it will have going forward. I mean, interestingly, we employed some contractors to do some work recently, and instead of staying in a local B&B or hotel, they immediately went on Airbnb to basically hire a house. So they could all live in that house. Now that's contractors, but as everything moves forward, so next it'll be maybe our commercial business travellers that will start to feel they'd rather hire a separate dwelling rather than just actually renting. Airbnb supplies whole houses rather than just bedrooms in
I mean, Chris was saying, and he knows a lot more about it than I do, that the OTAs are now offering MICE bookings and direct bookings of combinations of space, and I just see it all becoming a route to market in time, and the sooner we grasp it as hoteliers and realise that it's a route and embrace it, they may be doing all the hard work that we're trying to do in our own fields. They may be doing it, and maybe it's a cost, but maybe it's going to be a good solution as well. So, but I don't know. I know it's on red, but does anyone want to add anything to that, or do we just want to thank the panel and go and have a coffee? Does anyone? No, I'm not going to. Does anyone want to ask anything on that? Please, we got time. It's just red. No, okay. Well, I hope you'll all join me. A fantastic panel. Sitting up here and saying what hasn't gone well is I had to comb the industry to find.
I'm not sure that's a compliment.
But to find people brave enough and with stories to tell. So can we all join them and thank them very much, please?